I will introduce Zach Sweets with Evergy. Zach is the chair of the Grandview and South Kansas City Government Affairs Committee. And before I do that, actually, and Kim Curtis, my
Good morning.
counterpart at Grandview, is with us. So I'm going to turn it over to Zach and let you take it away.
Wonderful. Good morning. It's great to see everybody, at least on the panel. I can't see all the participants, but thank you for jumping on. It looks like we have quite a few folks. And this is our morning, our legislative breakfast that we usually have. Hopefully this is one of our last ones before we get to, maybe one more before we get to see everybody together again. But we do have a busy agenda. We'll be looking to wrap up around 9:15. I'll just run through the agenda real quick to kick off. We do have, I think for the first time, Senator Greg Razor joining us from the Missouri legislature. And then after that, we'll have a conversation with Ryan Silvey, who is the chairman of the Public Service Commission, the commission that tells us folks what we get to do, what we can and can't do with utilities. So that'll be a really interesting conversation, especially following what we saw a few weeks ago. And then we also have Rob Dixon, the director of the Missouri Department of Economic Development. He's no stranger to this group and really looking forward to hearing from him. I feel like every time Rob is with us, we get a little bit more information about the direction of the state from an economic development stance. And I know that we'll have plenty of questions there. And somebody that I was really excited to see on the agenda as well, Clyde McQueen. Clyde is the CEO of the Full Employment Council, and just some of the conversation before we went live, something I already knew, Clyde and the Full Employment Council is always working for the community and for the folks, for the people here, and have some really interesting and just a great advocate in the community, and they get work done. That's what I know them as. So all these folks are going to be much more entertaining than I to speak, or not entertaining, but informative to speak today. So we'll wrap up with the legislative update before we end the day here. But not to take up any more time, the senator from the 7th, I see he has his downtown Kansas City picture behind him, always repping his home. Senator Greg Razor, thanks for being on with us this morning.
Thanks, Zach. I appreciate it. I think I have, about 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to try to squeeze a whole bunch of stuff in, so I may talk fast, and I apologize for that. There's been a lot going on. Before I get started, first and foremost, this is my first time to be with you all as senator. I just want to let you know I absolutely love the Senate. I love the job. I love the work, even when days that I want to put my head through a wall. It's still a great place to work. And I want to thank you all for entrusting me with this position. It's truly an honor to get to represent you. I want to start off a little bit with vaccination issues that are happening throughout the state. If I can, this seems to change almost on a daily basis. So let me take you back to a week ago. Missouri was receiving around 120,000 doses of Pfizer and Moderna vaccinations. I know there's been a lot of frustration, myself included, when we see the mass vaccination events happening in these very rural communities. So let me explain how that kind of happened. About 50% of those doses coming into the state were immediately allocated to what have been designated high throughput hospitals. So in Kansas City, you should think Truman Medical Center, St. Luke's. That's ours. In St. Louis, it would be Barnes Jewish Hospital, etc. Another large percentage was going to federally qualified health centers, local health departments, etc. In Kansas City, that's Swope, KC Care Clinic. There was a smaller percent that was kind of held back to be able to strategically send to places around the state, which makes sense. And then I think the governor's thought was, if we're sending, and I can't speak for the governor, this is what I think the administration was thinking. If we're sending half of our doses to St. Louis and Kansas City, then we need to have these mass vaccination events around the state. What we saw was occurring when they did that was it was creating vaccination deserts in the two cities. So the governor has shifted the plan and is now looking to address mass vaccination, or not mass vaccination, I apologize, to address the vaccine deserts here in Kansas City, also in St. Louis, particularly in communities of color that really need it. We got good news with the Johnson & Johnson vaccination coming on board. I believe we're getting 50,000 doses of that vaccine this week, and we were expecting that to continue. There's been a supply chain issue, so we'll get it this week, none for 2 weeks, and then it's supposed to start back up. So we've been working with the governor's office behind the scenes. This is highly complicated. I am not going to sit here and tell you that the governor's office has done everything perfectly, because I don't believe they have. But I do think that they are trying to find a logical way of rolling this out. And I'm appreciative of their willingness to adjust as we see, like I said, these vaccination deserts pop up. Moving on from that, one of the big issues that have come up this year is education reform. It's a high priority for the Speaker in the House and for many members in the Senate. On the Senate side, we are dealing with, it's known as Senate Bill 55. They kind of took I'm not sure what the plan was behind this. They seem to take every education reform idea and just bunch them into one mammoth piece of legislation. And so this was everything from flat out voucher programs, educational savings accounts, an opt-in for any kind of sex ed. It was just a huge, massive mess of a bill. And I can tell you, if you go online and you read the bill today, that bill cannot pass the Senate. There's enough Republican support or Republican opposition that it's not going to pass. So I think something is going to pass. It's going to be something that we're not real happy with, but it's not going to be nearly as large and egregious as what you will read today. Now, what it looks like, I don't know, but I want to prepare you. Like, they're going to get something passed this year. It's too high of a priority. But if you go and look at Senate Bill 55 as it's written right now, I would just urge you not to get too worked up about what you see, because that in its current form can't pass. I also want to talk about something that we discuss here, and I always try to discuss with chambers, is infrastructure and the gas tax. As you know, this is something I've worked on since I was first elected to the House. We haven't increased. The last time the gas tax increased was 1996. The last time a vote was successfully taken to increase it was 1992. Obviously, MoDOT has done a great job keeping our system of roads and bridges working as well as possible. There is a renewed push to try to get something done this year. It's going to be an uphill climb. The majority party is being very creative with some of the ways they're looking at getting this done. We'll see what the final product is. I'll tell you, I'm very worried if we can't get it done this year. We're certainly not going to do it next year, because there's no way we're going to get a Republican majority legislature to vote for a tax increase in an election year. So this is, for me, this is a high priority. This is something that we really need to get done this year. We did get good news that the final design team for the new Buck O'Neill Bridge has been approved by the commission. That project is up and running. MoDOT is very appreciative of the fact that the city of Kansas City, Missouri chipped in $72 million of our own city money to help make that possible. I want to point out that while that's great, that is $72 million that could have been going to city-owned roads, bridges, sidewalks. We on the state level cannot, we have not lived up to what we need to do to provide for our roads and bridges. And so now we're having to look to our municipal governments to chip in. So it's just another reason why we've got to increase the gas tax. There is a big issue that I apologize, I am forgetting. Zach, what is, there's one more big issue out there and it just left my mind.
It could be some of the changes to law enforcement and what they're allowed to use the use of force and some of those surrounding those issues.
That's exactly it. So Senator Brian Williams worked very hard to try to bring together law enforcement and look at some of the law enforcement practices from this summer that we saw in the protest that has kind of been, I would say, hijacked by some other issues that's been put on there. One of those is going to be concerning police residency in Kansas City. Senator Luke DeMeyer is very passionate about removing the requirement that Kansas City police officers live within the city limits of Kansas City. This kind of ties in, this issue came up in St. Louis a couple of sessions ago. I would argue that the issue in St. Louis and the issue in Kansas City is vastly different for many reasons, but maybe mostly the literal size of our two cities. The city of St. Louis is actually geographically very small. And as we know, the city of Kansas City is enormous. So I don't know if that's going to get through. I've had conversations with him. You know, if this is something that is going to pass, I want to make sure, not to steal a phrase from Donald Trump, but I hope we build a wall on State Line Road. The last thing that I want to see is for Kansas City, Missouri officers living across the state line and raising a generation of Jayhawks. I don't think any of us want to see that happen. So that is something that's been very active, I think, that's going to be coming up soon. Are there other things that people are interested in hearing about? Those have kind of been the big issues that we've dealt with in the Senate, or will be.
Yeah, I just reminded everyone that if you have a question for any of the panelists, please feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A preferably, and we can definitely get to it. I will, before we say thank you to the representative, I hope he stays with us even after his time. I will kind of toss it back to Kim and Vicki to see from the chamber perspective if there are any questions for Greg.
No, I think you covered a lot of what's important to us. Transportation obviously is one that's been on our priority list for years and years now. So hopefully we can see something moving on that for sure.
So I'll tell you, I'll try to give you an idea of what's being proposed. Senator Schatz, who is the president pro tem, has thrown out this idea, and it's a model that South Carolina used. So his proposal as it sits now is that we would raise the fuel tax 2.5 cents each year for, I believe, 6 years. But there is a built-in rebate program. So Missourians could go through, so the current tax is 17 cents. As it increases, you can keep your receipts from the pump And when you file your Missouri taxes, you can turn that in and get a rebate for what you paid. The reason that they're doing this is that means that there is a zero fiscal note, because the department, when they come up with fiscal notes, they have to assume that everyone is going to use the rebate. And with a zero fiscal note, it's a way of not putting this back on the ballot. So I don't know if they're going to be able to pull this off. I have some concerns with the rebate, but if we're at a point where we have to do something, And also
Yes.
keep in mind that we are quickly coming up on a situation where the fuel tax is just going to be obsolete. We need to increase it one last time, and then we need to shift gears and figure out what we're going to do, because in 10, 15, 20 years, the majority of the fleet of vehicles out there are going to be electric.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to think about how do we fund our Department of Transportation once we wean ourselves off of, gasoline and diesel.
Absolutely. And I hate to, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I am going to join a call on Monday. The Missouri Chamber is doing, one of the speakers is from South Carolina, is going to talk about that. Would be happy to share that link with anybody that would like to join and learn more about that.
Great.
Absolutely. I hate to ruin a good segue talking about electric vehicles and we could have a conversation about how that's generated. But real quick, rapid fire, we did have two questions before we move on here. Internet sales tax, does it look like that's going to pass this year? And then also Medicaid expansion, quick update.
Medicaid expansion, I think they're going to try to mess with it in the House. I think we'll be able to protect it in the Senate and get that through. Now, whether they try to put another initiative on the ballot to reverse what we just passed is another story. I'm hearing rumblings that there are some folks in the House that want to do that. But hopefully we can protect it, and I think we'll get it funded this year. The internet sales tax, I do think that there is real momentum to get that passed this year. It has come through a committee that I serve on. Senator Sandy Crawford has introduced it, and it brings in this tax, and I won't get into the details, but essentially the funding goes directly to state debt. So it's not some new program. It's just, we don't know how much that's going to bring in. And I think part of the idea is we'll just put it towards debt. We'll watch this for a few years, get a sense of how much it's bringing in, and then reevaluate what to do with it. But I'm somewhat hopeful that we can get it done this year.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Senator. I almost slipped up and called you representatives. Thank you, Senator Greg Razor, for joining us this morning. And really just providing that update. If you have any more legislative questions, I'm looking at the agenda. We do have our trustee lobbyists to give an update, legislative update of a lot of the issues that are pertinent to both chambers at the end of the program here. But we have with us this morning, I guess technically he is my boss's 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 boss in some form. We have with us Chairman Ryan Silvey, Chairman of the Public Service Commission. Ryan, it's great to see you.
Hey, good to see you. Hope you can hear me okay. I was having trouble with my AirPods. So
we can absolutely hear you and see you, and thank you for being with us this morning. Really, I guess I'll just turn it over to you and kind of give us an overview. What do you do? What is the Public Service Commission?
Sure. Yeah, it is one of the most complicated and interesting jobs I've ever had. Essentially back during the Industrial Revolution and the electrification of the United States, 20 years ago now, the country kind of decided that utilities, which now we know is electric, gas, and water, were important enough that they needed to be essentially socialized, and that the private market wasn't going to run all of that infrastructure out to the most rural parts of the country because it wasn't going to be profitable. So every state in the country basically set up a state public service commission or public utility commission, depending on the state, and they give charters to utilities that are publicly traded, such as yours. And in exchange for a service territory, those utilities are required to serve everyone in the service territory. But in exchange for that, we will guarantee the profitability of the company at a reasonable rate. So essentially, the statute says that we are to provide just and reasonable, safe and adequate service at just and reasonable rates. So we are a creature of statute. So everything we do is guided by the legislature. I see the job as pretty much calling balls and strikes. I mean, the policymakers set the policy, and then we make sure that it gets implemented. So anytime a utility wants to change their rates, which aren't always raised, by the way, sometimes they do go down, or if they want to build something, massive capital projects or new generation. In the case of electricity, they come to us for approval of those things. And so we have a steady stream of cases that deal with a number of topics. So most recently, obviously with the cold snap that came through that everybody is interested in, there are a couple of statutory levers that anticipated instances such as that, as far as the gas prices spiking and so forth. So there's a case mechanism called a purchased gas adjustment for gas companies like Spire, and there's a fuel adjustment clause for electric companies such as Evergy. So I anticipate that we will be seeing some fuel adjustment clause and purchased gas adjustment cases in the next year or so. But that's kind of my broad 101 utility regulation, but I'm happy to speak more specifically or answer any questions.
If I may, one question that I know that I received quite a bit is, who gave Evergy the right to do what they did? Can you explain that?
As far as the rolling blackouts?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so across the country, there are about 10 regional organizations called either regional transmission organizations or ISO, and I can't remember that acronym. There's so many acronyms. But essentially, those are regulated by FERC, the federal version of what we do. So every state has a utility commission, and then the country has the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. FERC regulates the regional bodies. Evergy is a member of the Southwest Power Pool, which when they joined, ultimately there was a case and the Public Service Commission granted them permission to join. We signed off on allowing them to join. This would have been years ago. But once they're in the Southwest Power Pool, those decisions as far as generation and transmission are governed through them and via FERC. So when the Southwest Power Pool determined that generation in their entire footprint, which is about 14 states, wasn't going to be enough to meet demand, they issued the order for all of the utilities in their footprint to curtail usage, and that's what led to the rolling blackouts. But that is different than what happened in Texas, and I would argue that our participation, and by ours I mean Missourians, participation in the Southwest Power Pool on the west, and actually it's MISO on the east. We have a different regional that handles Ameren. I would argue that our participation in that kept it from being much, much worse, because what you saw in Texas was days without power. And the fact that we are tied to 14 other states and on the west, and actually about the same number on the east, means that the system is built in such a way to be able to redirect power to us. I mean, we essentially have connected these states in a way to make it built to be bailed out, I guess, if that makes sense. Whereas Texas with ERCOT in their situation is not built to be bailed out, and so they weren't able to receive enough energy from other sources to keep the lights on.
Thank you. And we do have one question, which is, what issues are currently in the legislature that could impact our ability to respond to regional weather events like the one we saw just a few weeks ago, if you know of any?
You know, every year there's a number of utility bills that are filed. We're tracking some, but I don't know that any specifically, at least off the top of my head, are related to our ability to respond like that. I guess tangentially, maybe the one on securitization, which has to do with retiring coal plants and replacing that generation and power, that possibly could have some effect on it. But no company is going to close a coal plant without a plan to replace the generation that's needed. So I don't know that that bill specifically would affect it, but that's probably the closest one off the top of my head.
A slight spin-off of the securitization conversation, I would say, what kind of challenges does the PSC, as they look out over the entire utility infrastructure, not infrastructure, actually infrastructure, but the utility industry in Missouri, what challenges are ahead of Missouri and the companies that operate within Missouri to, I guess, modernize what they're doing and keep rates low and,
Sure.
well, I guess, competitive and just?
Sure. So, you know, transmission is a big issue. As I mentioned, in the West, in the Evergy footprint, Liberty down in the Southwest, they're in the Southwest Power Pool. On the East, Ameren is in MISO, Mid-Continent ISO. And so that means we have a seam between the two regions that runs right through Missouri. And so we frequently are dealing with issues on transmission across those seams between the two organizations. So that's one thing. I would say the senator touched on something right near the end, but the electrification of transportation, I think, is going to be hugely transformative to the needs of the grid. You know, almost every major auto manufacturer has announced the end of combustion engines by about 2035. Which means there's going to be a lot more charging that needs to take place, which will likely need to new generation, but also new transmission to make sure that everybody has the power that we need. And then also decarbonization. You know, a lot of people don't realize, we talk about the politics around global warming or the politics around renewable energy. But what I'm seeing and what I've seen for the last several years is that transformation is being driven primarily by the market, not by governments, not by mandates. I mean, some states have mandates and whatnot, but it's really the investors and Wall Street that are driving that. When you have, you know, huge capital banks like JP Morgan and Chase and some of those saying that they will not invest in new fossil fuel generation, that really lowers the capability of people to build those types of plants. And so they look for other ways to do it. So I think the market is going to drive that. And that's going to be a challenge as well.
And speaking of at least the local market, at least in who's paying these utility bills, realistically, what will the rate impact of the recent polar vortex be on small businesses down the road? And how,
Sure.
I guess, if you could explain a bit of how do you all kind of come up with rates? How often do they change or what have you?
Sure. So the process is one that takes many months. It's not something that you're going to see overnight. In the case of electric rates, the fuel adjustment clause statute caps any fuel adjustment clause charge at 2.5% of utility revenue. So it cannot go up infinitely. It is capped. So any difference that would need to be captured by the company would be put into a future rate case. The FAC statute says that you have to come in every 4 years at least if you have an FAC. I would anticipate that we will see FAC cases out of this on the electric side to start recouping some of that, and then the next rate case would be where that's adjudicated, primarily the rest of it. My guess, and this is just, this is just a guess, but I would say that Evergy will probably be in sometime in the next year to 2 years. And then we have rate cases ongoing now on the other side. And in fact, Spire is in right now. Their case procedure has started. So I can't really say anything about gas because it's a pending case. But the process it's a full-blown litigation. So you have the company that will come to the commission and ask for their rate adjustment. Then you have the Office of Public Counsel, which is another state agency, which essentially serves as the representation of the consumers and their interests. They usually will argue the other side of the rate case, that the rates shouldn't be as high as the company is asking for instance. But then you'll have multiple other parties, like industrial consumers will have people, a group that comes in, commercial consumers, sometimes environmental groups like the Sierra Club or renewable groups like Renew Missouri. They'll all be participating in these cases. And so they will all come in and argue in front of the commission. And then we serve as the judges that make the decision. So we are charged with, like I said, calling balls and strikes. So we look at what the statute says, we look at the case and the evidence and testimony that's presented, and then we make a decision from there.
So really quick before I toss you a softball, and then we'll get you out of the hot seat. With what we've seen with the weather here, especially with the cold snap, we're not going to see immediate increase in our rates after that. Would that be correct?
So if you're in a regulated utility, which we are here in Kansas City, you shouldn't see an immediate rate impact other than your usage. If your usage increased during that time to run your furnace more. But as far as the actual rate and the rate that you're charged for that usage, it'll be several months before there's an actual impact to that.
So no $5,000 bills like we're seeing in Texas.
No. Texas is an interesting study in this whole process because they essentially deregulated for all intents and purposes, and so they had consumers that were basically, whether they knew it or not, engaging in future speculation. And some of those consumers, when you're seeing on social media these people with $17,000 bills for the week, that's because they were using a service provider that was paying spot prices every day. And when those prices shot up because supply went down, those consumers were left holding the bag. So in a regulated state, you don't have those issues because the rates are fixed and they are fixed for a period of time. And then you have to come back in, every so many years to adjust them. They don't fluctuate like that.
And finally, this is a group made up of appointments from the governor. How often, if at all, does partisan politics play into? You mentioned that sometimes issues like global warming, I don't even know what the common term is for that now, but green energy, that can get partisanized and everything. How often do those ideologies play into your all's work?
So over the history of the commission, it ebbs and flows. There are stories from years ago of them being highly contentious, both with personalities and partisanship. But the commission's made up of 5. So there's 5 of us appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. Once you're confirmed, you get a term for 6 years. And right now, the current makeup of the Missouri Commission is unique in the country because all 5 of us are former senators. So we all have prior relationships. We've known each other for years. We've worked with each other on legislation and different things. So we really have left the partisanship at the door, to be honest. I mean, we are almost always unanimous. I mean, very, very few times do we end up with a split vote. And when the vote's split, it's not even usually on party lines necessarily. We did have, we did 9 orders yesterday. One of them was a 4-1. So one commissioner just didn't like that particular order, had an issue with it. But we don't see the partisanship bleeding into the commission, at least right now with the current makeup. And I hope that stays the same because we just are able to work out the differences and find, a policy that we can all, either get behind or sign off on, at least be okay with.
It's always great to hear, especially when we're talking about folks that used to be in the legislature, that relationships supersede partisanship to be able to get the work done for the state of Missouri.
Yeah, it's kind of funny
So,
because during the cold snap, Mahoney was interviewing me, and he asked about what did the commission have to say. This was like the day after like the whole thing happened. We had a commission meeting, and we didn't talk about it at all. We went through our business that we had planned out, and he made the comment, and he was like, oh well, Kansas spent like an hour and a half talking, and the commissioners giving speeches. And I was like, well, all five of us, we've had that time in our life. We've all given speeches. We've all scored political points. Like, we're done with that. Like, we all just want to get to work and just get this stuff done. So, you don't get a lot of pontificating, and you don't get a lot of, taking pot shots at the other side, which is nice.
Good. Well, Chairman Ryan Silvey, thank you for joining us this morning. I know just from the activity of the questions that people were hanging on your every word, especially given the situation we just came out of. And I don't know about you, but for me, the situation we came out of was an educational moment for a lot of folks about where their energy comes from and how that gets regulated. So thank you for continuing that education with us this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're going to turn now to the director of the Missouri Department of Economic Development. Again, as I said earlier, he is no stranger to this group, Rob Dixon. And very happy to have Rob with us. Good morning, Rob.
Morning, Zach. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And I know that I feel like it's been quite some time since we've seen you last. And I know that you all have been busy over there at the the Department of Economic Development. So you want to share with us an update?
No, I appreciate that. It seems like it's been even longer than it actually has. And I was just kind of thinking about that, how normally see you guys kind of crowded together in an alcove in the Capitol building, and you've got a great group in, and I always look forward to it each year. But such is the year that we're in right now, and look forward to seeing everybody in person. Zach, I do have an update and some slides I wanted to share. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides on the screen, though? Okay, very good. I think the topics that we just heard from Chairman Silvey and Senator Razor are really a great kind of segue into what I was going to discuss. And I know Clyde's going to talk workforce in a little bit. And so all of these issues, workforce, infrastructure, that these are the fundamental issues in economic development. And I just think it's such an important conversation that's happening all across the state. And there's a lot of people who are spending a lot of time and energy leading on it. And what I wanted to hit on today was kind of two very different topics. So I'll talk a little bit about our economic development efforts and sort of where we're at, where we've come from over the last year and where we're at. And then I'm going to shift and drill down into a little bit on the vaccination efforts because obviously Governor Parson announced the beginning of the next tier and the next phase of our vaccine efforts. And it really touches on the private sector. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit for the chamber members today. So I'm going to just jump right into it, of course. And everybody, I think, knows this intuitively, but I like to step back a little bit and just look at the data. And prior to the pandemic hitting a year ago, Missouri was at an almost high watermark for the number of jobs in our state. We had just about 3 million people that were getting up every day, earning a paycheck, taking care of their families, doing all those kind of things, which was literally one of the highest amount of employment we've ever had. And then the bottom fell out, and 345,000 people lost their jobs almost overnight. And this was the case, obviously, all over the country, but this was the impact in Missouri. 345,000 jobs were lost a year ago. 30% of our consumer spending dropped off, and small businesses were just hammered with nearly half of their revenues dropped. And in the year since then, it's really turned around. Obviously, there's still improvements that need to be made, and we still have some of that gap that we have to close. But 70% of the jobs that we lost have returned. I mean, 70% of those 345,000 people have been able to regain work, get back to work, get back to earning for their families. And that's just tremendous. And obviously, there's still folks that haven't had that opportunity yet. But if you look at where we're at in terms of the overall, relative to the rest of the country, literally 11th best in the country for the recovery of those jobs. And so this is a global pandemic. It's impacting different countries in different ways, in different states in different ways. And I think, this is one thing that we can look back on and I think be fortunate or feel fortunate that, Missouri has really led the way here. And I think a lot of it has to do with that the balanced approach the governor has really kind of emphasized, and it's, trying to work with our local leaders and putting in place statewide public health policies that certainly work with local leaders to try to protect public health, but also to protect our economy. And, in other states, you can see the different results, but, we are fortunate that we've moved in that right direction. So just kind of a little bit deeper into that, even on the economic development side, just in the last year, these are numbers that you can see on the screen, but they're since really the pandemic and kind of right around that time. But we've seen a massive influx of additional capital investment and assistance for businesses that has really helped us recover. We've seen over 8,000 new jobs that have been created. Those are net new jobs on top of, where we were at. This is something that Clyde has been a huge advocate for and leader in, but apprenticeships and our partners in the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development, Zora Mulligan, Marty Leathers. But Missouri is the second best state in the country for apprenticeships. Not relative to size, not relative to population, but number 2 overall. And I think that just really speaks to the emphasis that collectively state and local leaders have put on workforce development and really pushing forward on that. So all of that pays off. Just a year or two ago, Missouri ranked 21st in the country among a metric from Site Selection magazine. Now, so I would suspect that most folks on this call are not subscribers to Site Selection magazine, but that's a pretty important audience in economic development because those site selectors are the ones that are advising companies on where they're going to locate. And anytime you see these big corporate expansions and relocations, it very much will utilize these site selectors, these advisors to corporate relocations. And for a long time, we were kind of in that fair to Midland range in the mid 20s, low 20s, high 30s. And we just jumped quite a bit on business climate rankings, which again puts us in that very top tier of states in the country. Now that's because of, a variety of policies, but slow, steady growth in things like, not growth necessarily, but over the long term, we've looked at things like protecting our state's bond rating. We've kept costs relatively low. We've made sure that, business risks are relatively low in the state. And it's kind of those, blocking and tackling things that have happened over generations that are really starting to pay off. And I think, again, most recently, the governor's incredible focus and investment in infrastructure development, in workforce development that's paying off. So some things that we're really proud of. Over the last year, of course, the CARES Act, the federal stimulus funds have really helped provide a shot in the arm, pardon the pun there on vaccines, but it's really helping us, I think, plow forward on it. And you'll see on the screen just a couple of different things that the state has drilled down into on some of our specific recovery programs. We've had some stuff focused for broadband expansion. Speaking of infrastructure, the tourism industry was really hard hit across the state. And in fact, that's still one of the areas that has not fully recovered because people are just still somewhat hesitant to travel and go to events and things like that. And so worked with those destination marketing organizations, kind of the convention and visitors bureaus of the state, small business efforts, PPE production. Remember a year ago, PPE could not be found, for want of Q-tips, basically. The whole country was held back by supply chains of these kind of things. And so the governor really emphasized the fact that he did not want Missouri to be held back or be dependent on international supply chains on some of these things. And so worked with Missouri manufacturers to retool. And we've seen our stockpiles in our state rebound for PPE. And no one really even talks about that anymore, but it's because of that hard work to get those stockpiles built back up. And so this is just a snapshot of kind of the work that's been done. And I wanted to show you this in economic development. We call them projects, but these are at any given point in time kind of the active corporate opportunities that we have going on in the state. It's not the sum total that we deal with over the course of a year. It's literally a snapshot of where we're at, at this point in the year. And I just wanted to show you, compared to last year, we are still seeing really good and strong movement in interest from companies that are looking at Missouri. At this point last year, we had 27 projects in the pipeline, and we've got a few more right now. We're seeing about roughly the same, a little bit down on kind of new jobs in the pipeline, but still holding our own. But look at the changes in capital investment from this point last year. Last year at this point, we were trying to entice $411 million in new investment into our state, and at this point this year, we're looking at nearly $1 billion that's coming on board. And these are, capital investments by private sector companies that are looking at projects across Missouri. And so it's really kind of an interesting dynamic, and you can see that interaction between jobs and capital investment. And we're seeing that quite a bit, and this has been an ongoing trend in economic development over the last few years, which is, increased capital investment relative to the job side. And I think, we will continue to see these changes as a result of the pandemic. And we're still holding our own right now, though, in Missouri. Senator Razor touched on a couple of these things, but I wanted to just hit on some of the budget priorities from the governor's perspective and from the department's perspective that relate specifically to workforce, to infrastructure, and economic development. Tourism, of course, the governor was able to release some funds that we're not going to have available towards the end of the fiscal year because the budget has been performing better than expected. So we're able to get that back out, but looking at trying to request an additional $5 million for broadband. I know Mark Coulter, I saw him, weighing in the chat here, but there's additional investments for our ports across the state and for our, scholarship programs in higher ed. And again, even during a pandemic, again, it's the blocking and tackling, but continuing investments in infrastructure and continuing investments in workforce. And certainly agree with Senator Razor's take earlier that, we have to deal with these issues. They're not often exciting. They're not often pleasant to talk about, but if we want to have a strong economy in 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future, we have to plant that tree now, proverbially speaking, and continue to invest in our people and invest in our infrastructure. So just a real quick deep dive here into some of the things that we're working on within the department, and specifically a couple things that I want to call out. We went through a pretty significant reorganization over the last year or so, and I will spare the folks on this call those deep details of it. But we went from being a very large organization that had many missions to a very small organization that's focused really on working directly with our regional business and community partners. And over the course of the coming year, our top priority is to work with our local economic development partners to make sure that the state's strategies and initiatives are aligned with what you're trying to accomplish locally. My background is at the local level in economic development, and I always get really frustrated when that, I'm from the state and I'm here to help kind of thing. I think that we know best, that the locals, the local partners in any communities know best for your own communities, and we want to assist you rather than come in and try to say what the state's economic development objectives should be. So we want to make sure that we're supporting you in a much broader and better way that's more strategic and aligning our resources at the state level. So a lot of work on that front. Okay, I'm going to shift over to vaccines real quick. Hopefully you've seen the news that Governor Parson announced about a week ago that on March 15th, the state will be activating what we call Phase 1B Tier 3. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what that looks like here. But to start with, the state's vaccination priorities, really our entire COVID recovery program over the last year has been focused on these 3 priorities, but taking them in priority order. And it's kind of a surreal kind of moment where you have to triage and you have to establish those priorities, but that's really what the last year has been like. So for the vaccine side, saving lives, reducing hospitalizations, and keeping folks safe has driven the way that we've approached our vaccines. There's an extremely limited supply of vaccines thus far, and that's really why we've had to prioritize the efforts here. And so once we kind of address that piece, then you can move into expanding it out to kind of broader audiences for different industries and the like. And so that's what I kind of wanted to touch on here. So phase 1A, 1B tier 1, and 1B tier 2 are currently active. And so that's really our healthcare infrastructure, our emergency services, our public works, our first responders, and anybody that's high risk. And we've got resources online, so you don't have to try to navigate all of it while you're looking at the slides here. But on March 15th, we will initiate that tier 3, which is our critical infrastructure phase. Then phase 2, kind of following on from there, is prioritization of kind of our equitable economic priorities from that. And so one of the things to note is that once a phase or eligibility tier is activated, it stays activated. And again, the whole point of this is that the supply chain has been fairly limited. And we do think that there is some pretty good news ahead on supply chain, that this limited supply situation that we're facing right now is likely to change, where we have really all the vaccines that we want very, very soon. But just to give you a sense of scale, of course, we've got more than 6 million people living in our state right now. And when we activate tier 3, we're going to be hitting the halfway point of those who are eligible, just about 3 million some odd people in that at that point. And so we do have on our website, and I'll have it on screen here, but moststopscovid.com, you'll be able to see who falls into these critical infrastructure categories. But really, it's based on this critical infrastructure. This tier 3 is really all of our K-12 and child care folks. This is our utility industry, kind of an appropriate topic for today. Our electric, water, sewer, internet, IT, communications infrastructure, as well as kind of our first cut of our food and agriculture. So food production, food processing, food distribution, and sales at the grocery store. That's kind of all that comes into that. We have about 550,000 people that are in this this new population that's coming on board. But the last point I wanted to leave you with is that as business leaders, there are some things that you need to be doing right now to be planning for the activation of phase 1B tier 3, and then eventually phase 2, which we think is going to be about 45 days beyond that, probably in the worst case scenario, and probably sooner than that based on what we're seeing in supply chain and opening up. In fact, President Biden just announced that by May, he expects that all adult Americans will be able to have access to a vaccine. And we're getting pretty promising word from the White House and from the pharmaceutical manufacturers that supply chain constraints are very soon to be a thing of the past on the pharmacy side. And so that's incredibly important for our rollout here, because the vaccine is what will end the pandemic. So three options for business leaders now. One, your employees, when they become eligible, they are just like any other eligible Missourian, and they can go anywhere to get vaccinated at a registered vaccinator. So they can go to their doctor's office, go to a pharmacy, they can go to their local health agency, and they can go through the process there on their own to get vaccinated. So that's kind of option one. You don't really have to do anything as an employer. You can just make sure your employees know these resources. But we also know that some employers want to establish a partnership with a vaccinator. So maybe you're a kind of maybe a larger business, and you have a couple hundred people working at your business, and you're eligible, and you want to go ahead and get set up an on-site opportunity. You can do that. It's not going to be coordinated by the state or anything, but you can reach out to your local hospital or healthcare system, or there's some pharmacies, and you can plan to do that with them. And then in a rare case, and I think this is probably going to be concentrated in just a couple of sectors that have these specific cases and expertise. But if you have medical or clinical professionals that work for you, or you have a relationship with a third party that does those kind of things, you can actually register yourself to be a vaccinator, which means you as a state, as an organization, can sign up with the state to receive a shipment on your own and administer it. Now, of course, there's a lot of you have to meet a lot of criteria to actually do that. You'd be qualified medically as a vaccinator to do that, and but that certainly is an option. And finally, the website that you see on the screen, you can find a lot more details about all of those things that I just talked about. Obviously, each of those topics is a presentation in its own right. And so just for the sake of time, I did condense it down a little bit, but would very strongly urge folks to go to our state website, mostopscovid.com, and you can find a lot of resources on those items. But again, very good news on the horizon here in terms of vaccine availability, and I think very good news on the horizon in terms of our economic recovery. And in my mind, those things are intricately linked, that as our public health situation improves, so does our economy. And just strongly appreciate all of the help and support and encouragement that we've received from everybody on this call. The chambers, you guys have always been great partners to us and have continued to be that throughout the pandemic. The governor very much appreciates it and know the hard work that you put in every single day. And just thanks for having me today. But I'd be happy to answer any questions, Zach, or talk about anything else that you'd like in greater detail.
Yeah, I know that in this, having done this for now a year, I can say, so we don't have any questions right now, but that just is more indicative of the fact that you've done so well. And so we appreciate you to come and talk to us. I think a lot of us in our various areas have felt the impacts of COVID in our communities and the business communities and how that's impacted everyone. But to see the numbers is a whole nother side of that. And also to see how we're doing on just a year later is also really encouraging to see what the department is doing, kind of really creating, taking this as an opportunity to invest and make some commitments and some look forward to the future. So we really appreciate Director Rob Dixon coming on this morning and giving us an update, especially with the more about the vaccine updates, and mostopscovid.com. I think I put the redirect address in the chat as well, covidvaccine.mo.gov. It gets you to the same place. I just tried it. And so definitely jump on there and to get more information. So we just thank Director Dixon for joining us this morning with that update. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So we'll turn now to, I love this. This is all kind of like, it's making sense, right? We're getting the big picture. Here's the legislative side of things, and here's what's going on with our energy. And now we just got an update about kind of what the economic development and business world looks like. But obviously, none of this moves without the people and the workforce that is out there every day, that is on the front lines of what's happening with the impacts of COVID, and then also trying to get back or even build back better, if you will. And so we have with us the CEO of the Full Employment Council, Clyde McQueen. And Clyde's going to actually kind of give us just an update of the situation around workforce development. Good morning, Clyde.
Good morning, Zach, and thank you all for having me. And it's good to be out and in this morning. So I like to get behind you. I'm just going to basically go over just two areas. One is where we are now with some things that have happened here locally in Missouri, and two, what's going to be happening in the future. I will say first off, if you all looked at we've heard a lot of stuff about the recovery plan and all those things. But one of the things that we've looked on in our region, and I've worked with Kim and I've also worked with Vicky, is to try to create a workforce ecosystem, because it's not just about training. Increasingly in our system, it is about childcare, which is very, very important. It's about transportation, which is very, very important. And increasingly, it also involves housing. And so how do we make sure that having all those four legs of a stool coordinated enables us to increase the labor market participation of the people that we're trying to seek to fill the positions that we have. And a lot of times, particularly in the pandemic, employers would ask me, Clyde, I've got these 30 jobs, and why come nobody's showing up? And increasingly, particularly in our region, where about 4 out of 10 families are led by a single head of household, be they male or female, the question that surrounds getting to and from work, dropping kids off, picking them up, and then being able to do everything in a timely fashion is a factor that complicates whether a person shows up, participates, even applies. And so one of the things that is looked at is in the recovery bill that's being debated and just was probably going to be voted on right now, two good things are going to happen. for related to the child care issue. One is that there's going to be a $3,000 child tax credit that can be forward funded. But most importantly, there's going to be an $8,000 child care tax credit, which is going to be very important for families with children because, as everybody knows, child care is extremely expensive, particularly good child care. So that's going to be in the present bill. Now, it's not going to be permanent, so that's going to be another, but there will be something that's going to be in this bill. That's what one of the things that's happening. Secondly, is the whole issue of transportation. And we've been working with the Kansas City Area Transit Authority, Rod Casey. I know Kim's been working with them, and Vicky too, and some other things. And we know the transportation is going to change, with specifically employer-based transportation. So we have been working with this group called Transloc, which is a subsidiary of the Ford Corporation. And right now what we're working on is a heat map that will be able to plot where the jobs are, where the people are, where the child care centers are, so that when we are talking to applicants or employers about how do we recruit, how do you get to and from work, we can be able to plot specifically where child care centers are, where you live, and then how the transit system works in between those. So we can talk more in a more informed basis, both to employers and to job seekers about where they can go, how they can organize the schedules to be able to get to and from their work. And as you all know, we're on a 24-hour economy. So we have transportation, warehouse, manufacturing, and that's very, very important. The other thing that's also happened is that Pell Grant was changed to allow training for persons who are ex-offenders before. Persons who were being released back into the community couldn't participate in Pell Grants. That regulation has changed. And now you'll be able to see more persons who, before they are pre-released, can be providing training in that area. Finally, I think we also want to make sure that in the present legislation that we're able to do a fast track recovery type programming. So we have been able to ask the Congress to consider in the new bill, because you all know this is a recovery bill, and then there's another bill called Build Back Better. So this is only half of the legislative proposals going to be coming out of Washington, D.C. The next one is where we're really going to start talking about funding infrastructure, funding workforce training. There's a whole other conversation that will be just as intense as this one that will occur, and it'll be using the same type of technical amendments to try and get that. With that, it's important to note that the new Secretary of Labor has his confirmation vote is coming. He was the mayor of Boston. His name is Marty Walsh, and I've worked with him and his staff on occasion. And also the Assistant Secretary is Julie Sue, who is the Labor Secretary for the state of California. It's very interesting because the top of the head, the secretary, comes from the local level. Julie Sue comes from the state level. And we do need those two to get together. Because I can tell you, the regulatory framework that surrounds these things is just too extreme. And so we have been saying, as a part of the reauthorization, that we've got to reduce the regulations, try to make these efforts more seamless, and to make it more user-friendly, both for the people and for the employers themselves. So that's been a strong promotion of ours, particularly when we saw that a lot of independent contractors had hard times even getting PPP or joint unemployment insurance. So that for us queued up. We had a number of people who were self-employed with extreme challenges in that area. Secondly, another interesting thing is that there's a huge focus on apprenticeship. And as Bob mentioned, apprenticeship is a huge area. And one of the things that addresses, particularly in our state, is the whole issue of people of training and not going into debt, which that is a big detractor for many persons who want to pursue training. The word on the street is if you go to school, even if you get a Pell Grant, you're going to get into debt, and that scares a lot of people away. So one of the things that we know that works together that creates this participation at the post-secondary level is the ability to be able to earn income while you're in training, or be able to enable yourself to secure training that is not so heavily debt focused. There also is a change in the new Authorization Act for GED programs to also have a component where you can do incumbent worker training through the GED program, which is a very unique idea. So for those persons who get their GED, that same program, they can do skills training to skill up at a particular employer, which is a unique novel model in and of itself. And finally, I think the other thing that is going to be happening is that there's going to be a whole focus on de-emphasis on semester-based timetables for training as a condition of funding particular course-specific programs. As you know, the semester-based training program was based on a farm system, spring, summer, and fall planning cycles. As a mini farmer myself, who does it, that's one of the main things that drives that. So there will be a more focus on more concentrated training that won't necessarily focus on semester, but will be industry informed. And that's going to be in the new law that's going to be debated in Congress. These areas of the legislation have already been filed. We have the support of the Senate, the Senate Committee of Health, Education, and Labor, and we also have the support of the chairman of the House Education and Workforce Committee. So they're both supporting this, and we have a lot of support from mayors. We have a lot of support from businesses to try to get this legislation and change it around. We can be a little bit more smooth and effective as we execute this going to the next century. So our largest challenge is going to be increasing the labor market participation of those persons who, but for childcare, but for transportation, but for the planners over here, they can get into the workforce system. Secondly, we want to have more industry-informed training, and as you all know, there are not very many skilled instructors, so we're trying to make sure that we're able to free up the ability of persons to participate who have the skill to train students. And then third, we want to make sure that there's training that's available that's not so debt focused and does not take as long. And so we've had great support in these areas from members of Congress, the new administration, and so we hopefully, after we get through this next year, that we'll be able to execute those. So that's kind of our focus, Zach. So it's a great time. It's a lot of fun, but it's really frustrating when you do your advocacy through a TV screen. I'm used to going out and at least having one of my chamber books under my arm and just say, hey, here you go, or so hopefully, as Vicki was saying, but when she opens hers up, so everybody else opened up. So we're looking forward to doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And real quick, Clyde, if you could, for those that aren't familiar with the Full Employment Council, can you kind of give us we appreciate the overview and the perspective that you brought, but kind of give us an idea of what you all do on a day in, day out basis.
Yeah, so we're the public workforce system. We're designated by the U.S. Department of Labor and the state of Missouri Office of Workforce Development. We cover 20. It used to be what's called the unemployment office. So we kill the unemployment when we say we're the reemployment office, and we also engage. We use the unemployment insurance system, which basically is really in another agency called DOLR, Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, which is where all your unemployment checks come from. But we're the agency to whom people apply and to whom people have to show up to look for a job to continue to receive those unemployment checks. Now, what happened in COVID, we kind of got caught into that. I mean, we saw close to 100,000 people because the UI system, and you all read the challenges that have been happening into the UI system because people had to come to our office. In fact, when they just had all those $60 billion worth of fraudulent payments that happened, a lot of people had to come back and reattest to their real identity in our system, and we just got flooded. I mean, we had to have people sitting out in our parking lot to be called and back in because now it's a huge issue. It also means that a lot of people need to be very careful because a lot of that money was done through computer fraud. And so a lot of the hackers were out there hacking people's numbers when they were online. A lot of their systems weren't that complete. So that was a huge thing that happened also. So we do retraining. We don't do training ourselves. We work with the training institutions to do so. But the one thing that we are trying to ensure that the state and everybody else is, the training is actually tied to employment. And that means that you have employers engaged, that the curriculum is relevant to the employer's needs presently. And I know we've had some people say, well, you know, if you got an IT job, you know, IT certificate, you can get a job. Listen, I've got about 8,000 IT people in our system right now because it didn't keep their licenses up to date, their credentials up to date. So it's got to be a lifelong learning type of thing, and you got to continue to do that. But also, just on the other end, we've got great growth right now. I'm sitting right now with a number of jobs by T-Mobile. They're going to be located in the Old Kemp Arena. that that are looking. They're paying great wages for persons. We got a number of manufacturing and IT companies are looking for folks. I think the big challenge is that in this new environment, people don't know where to go, how to apply, because it's not your normal application process. Employers are not doing applications normally, so there's some confusion. So I'll tell you, my phone number's been blown off the wall for parents whose kids are coming back, who are graduating from college, and say, my kid can't find a job. What can I do? So it is that. It's not. I think there's just this still new system that people have to get used to, that we've had to adapt to as well, to get people to the right place at the right time. But also there's an understatement, I think, of what the true employment rate is, because many people our child care capacity dropped 40% in the last quarter because of the fact that many child care centers didn't have persons coming to them because they were not working. Kids were staying at home. They had to lay their staff off. So when that happened, then the reduction, the number of persons that they had dropped by 40-something%. So that was a big, huge thing. But at the same time, we have a number of child care centers right now that are planning to expand and are doing new facilities and things like that. And child care was a big issue in the Recovery Act. So we hopefully, with this perfect storm, but we tell people all the time, it's not just about training, and we really got to focus on that, because when you look at a community like where Kim is or where Vicki is, we got to make sure where the people are, where the families are, where the jobs are, and we have to make sure that all those things tie together. So it's a little bit more of an ecosystem. It's not as much of a workforce system. It's a workforce system that is based, that has three things that have to all work in concert for us to increase labor market participation of the people that we're trying to target. And that increasingly becomes a challenge for us. It's important why we have all of the persons at this forum, both business, community organizations, and the people are working together to figure out how we can help them participate in our local economy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Clyde, for joining us this morning. And I think everyone can definitely tell Clyde's passion for his work. I mean, this is a very important piece of how we keep the region growing, how we keep our community strong, and really make sure that everyone is included in a part of this, a lot of this, as Clyde said, ecosystem. And so Kim, Vicki, I don't know about the both of you, but this is probably the best legislative breakfast, top to bottom, to really get an understanding of how all these things kind of interplay with one another. And we can really get a good sense of like where we're at. And then it's almost fitting that it's March, a year after everything really shut down, to really figure out where we're at in all these different sectors. I'm personally just kind of like internally kind of nerding out, getting all these figures and seeing kind of where we're at. So I think this has been a wonderful legislative breakfast. But before we kind of wrap up, and I just want to thank everyone who joined us, but also everyone who has thrown questions into the chat for our panelists. As we usually do, we do offer a moment for if there are any elected officials that are on to kind of give an update. And I do see Representative Mark Sharp, who has become just a staple with this group. We appreciate you joining us every time we have our legislative breakfast. And thank you again for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, South Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. Just wanted to give a brief update and a big shout out to the Chamber of Commerce and Vicki Wolgast and Jeremy Lefevre and Sam Pantieri, who all testified in favor of Blair's Law this past week. Blair's Law will make it a state offense and a felony for celebratory gunfire or indiscriminate gunfire within city limits. So hopefully this will reduce the crime that we have out here in South Kansas City and across the city, and make it more impactful for businesses to return to South Kansas City. So I just wanted to thank you all for your support, and hopefully this bill will be voted out of the General Laws Committee on Monday. So I just wanted to.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us, and I will toss it back to Vicki and Kim. But before I just say, go enjoy this wonderful weekend. It is so nice. I've been waiting for good weather.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zach, and thank you for always doing a wonderful job moderating our legislative breakfast. I don't have anything further. Kim, do you have anything?
No, I would just thank Sharon Kinder on our staff for always running the webinar, making sure the panelists have what they need to do what they do. So thank you, Sharon. And
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Well, as Zach said, everybody go enjoy this wonderful weather. I think we should all take Friday off, don't you? Not going to happen, but okay. We'll see everybody next month. Thank you.